3 hours and 15 minutes past midnight. Along the dense, frost-covered forests of the Suwalki Gap, a thin strip of land connecting Poland to the Baltic states, the world remains trapped in a state of deceptive tranquility. To an untrained observer, the darkness is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic swaying of ancient pines. But for those stationed at the forward observation posts of NATO's enhanced forward presence, the silence does not signal peace. It signals an ending. Imagine, if you will, the fragility of a continent that has forgotten the smell of cordite and the tremor of heavy tracks. For decades, these borders were mere lines on a map, protected by treaties and diplomatic handshakes. But tonight, the air feels heavy, ionized by the invisible radiation of high-powered radar arrays humming in the distance. Every soldier in the trench can feel it, a primal instinct. A tightening in the chest that precedes a catastrophe. Deep within the shadows of the eastern treeline, the monsters are waking up. Hundreds of cold-start diesel engines are suppressed by the thick forest canopy. Yet the low-frequency vibration travels through the soil. A mechanical heartbeat felt through the soles of combat boots. There are no lights, no radio chatter, only the precise, silent synchronization of global positioning systems and the cold glow of thermal optics. What happens when the deterrent fails? What happens when the ironclad guarantees of collective defense are met with the blunt force of 1,000 kinetic strikes? We often ask, what if? But as the digital clocks click toward the 0 hour, the question shifts from if to how long. How long can the gateway to Europe hold before the floodgates of steel are torn wide open? The transition from peace to total mechanized warfare does not happen with a shout. It happens with a whisper, a sudden absence of birdsong, and the distant, terrifying whistle of incoming ballistic trajectories. This is the anatomy of a nightmare. This is the first minute of a war that was never supposed to happen. 0 hour. 3 hours and 30 minutes past midnight. The deception of silence is shattered not by a single shot, but by the synchronized roar of 1,000 steel throats. Across a front stretching over 200 kilometers, the horizon ignites in a jagged line of artificial dawn, a terrifying spectacle of orange and crimson that bleeds into the black sky. In the first 60 seconds, the digital battlefield collapses, a massive, coordinated cyber assault, launched from secure servers deep within the aggressor's interior, floods NATO's tactical data links. Within moments, satellite uplinks stutter and die. Radar screens, once clear and vigilant, dissolve into a chaotic snow of electronic jamming. This is the electronic fog of modern war, where the defender is rendered blind and deaf before the first shell even touches the soil. Then comes the rain of iron. From hidden launch positions 60 kilometers behind the border, batteries of 152mm self-propelled howitzers and BM-30 Smerch multiple rocket launchers begin their rhythmic, devastating work. The sound is not a series of explosions, it is a continuous, soul-crushing wall of noise that vibrates the very marrow of the bones. Each rocket, a 12-unit volley of high-explosive fragmentation, carves out a grid of absolute destruction on the forward NATO barracks and ammunition depots. At the same time, the sky is filled with the high-pitched scream of Iskander-M tactical ballistic missiles. These are not mere projectiles, they are precision-guided scythes, traveling at Mach 6, performing evasive maneuvers to bypass the Patriot missile batteries that are struggling to lock on through the thick electronic interference. Their targets are surgical: the command and control centers in Warsaw, the hardened hangars at Ramstein Air Base, and the critical bridge crossings over the Vistula River. The impact of the first 10 minutes is total shock. Forward units, caught in their sleeping quarters or scrambling to their vehicles, find their communication lines severed. There is no order from high command. There is no situational awareness. There is only the thunder of incoming shells that strike with a margin of error of less than 5 meters. Guided by the cold, unblinking eyes of high-altitude reconnaissance UAVs circling in the stratosphere, the Earth trembles as if struck by a 7.0 magnitude earthquake. Concrete bunkers, designed to withstand the Cold War's greatest fears, are pulverized into dust by thermobaric warheads that suck the oxygen from the lungs of anyone within a 50-meter radius. The smell of burnt ozone, pulverized stone, and vaporized diesel fuel begins to drift across the border. carried by a cold western wind. The shock is not just physical, it is psychological. The realization that the impenetrable shield has been pierced in the first 600 seconds of the conflict sends a wave of paralysis through the ranks. The opening salvo has achieved its primary objective: the total erasure of the enemy's initial will to resist and the absolute decapitation of their local command structure. As the smoke from the first volley begins to rise, the heavy, rhythmic clanking of steel tracks begins to grow louder. The fire has cleared the path. Now, the flood of steel is ready to pour through the gaps. The artillery thunder has not yet ceased when the ground begins a different kind of vibration, a rhythmic, mechanical churning of the earth. From the tree lines of the east, the spearhead emerges, hundreds of main battle tanks, led by the T-90M, Prorive, and supported by rows of BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, surging forward in a classic V formation. This is not a slow, methodical advance. It is a high-velocity steel flood designed to achieve strategic depth before the enemy can even formulate a counterattack. The border barriers, once symbols of European sovereignty, are crushed beneath 60 tons of reinforced steel as if they were made of balsa wood. The aggressor's doctrine is clear: ignore the small, isolated pockets of resistance in the villages and bypass the fortified bunkers. Their eyes are fixed on the primary arteries, the highways and the logistics hubs. Every minute that the armored columns maintain their 40 km/h cross-country pace is a minute NATO loses to organize a coherent defense line. Above the clanking of tracks, the low-frequency thumping of attack helicopters adds a third dimension to the assault. Ka-52 alligators and Mi-28 night hunters skim the treetops, their thermal sensors hunting for the heat signatures of Leopard 2A7 and M1A2 Abrams tanks hidden in the brush. This is a combined arms symphony of destruction, where the sky and the ground work in lethal synchronization. When the first contact occurs between the opposing armored forces, it is a clash of generations and philosophies. A platoon of Leopard 2A7 tanks, scrambling to establish a blocking position near a vital highway junction, opens fire at 3,000 meters. The air is torn by the sound of 120 mm smoothbore cannons firing APFSDS rounds, sabots of depleted uranium traveling at over 1,700 meters per second. The visual is harrowing: the flash of the muzzle, the supersonic crack, and the impact where explosive reactive armor on the T-90M hulls detonates in a violent attempt to deflect the kinetic energy. Some rounds find their mark, turning multi-million-dollar machines into blackened husks in a fraction of a second. But the sheer mass of the attacking force is overwhelming. For every tank destroyed, 3 more emerge from the smoke, their autoloader systems cycling shells with cold, robotic efficiency. The defenders are facing a shock and awe reality. Their advanced sensors and sophisticated optics are being tested against a sheer volume of fire they were never designed to sustain. As the armored fist punches through the first and second lines of defense, the realization sets in: the Suwalki Gap has been breached. The Iron Corridor is now a highway for the aggressor's logistical tail, thousands of fuel trucks and ammunition carriers following the tanks, ensuring the momentum does not stall. The Blitzkrieg is not just about moving fast, it is about creating a psychological vacuum. By the time the sun begins to peek through the thick haze of diesel exhaust and burning rubber, the armored vanguard has already bypassed 60 kilometers of territory. They are no longer at the border, they are deep within the sovereign heart of Europe, carving a path of fire toward the ultimate prize. While the earth groans under the weight of the armored rush, the second front opens 5 miles above the clouds. This is the domain of the unseen, a realm where victory is measured in milliseconds and the spectrum of electromagnetic waves. In the early hours of the invasion, the sky over Central Europe becomes the most contested and lethal airspace in human history. The NATO response is immediate and sophisticated. From hardened airbases in the United Kingdom and Germany, a swarm of 5th-generation F-35 Lightning II fighters ascends into the darkness. They do not fly in tight formations, they operate as ghosts in the machine, their radar-absorbent skins making them nearly invisible to the enemy's traditional early warning arrays. Their mission is deadly silence, the suppression of the aggressor's integrated air defense system. The dreaded S-400 and S-500 batteries that create a bubble of denial over the battlefield. The engagement is a high-stakes chess match of electronic warfare. The F-35 pilots do not look through their windscreens to find the enemy. They see the world through a fused digital reality. Projected directly onto their helmet visors, they release Meteor long-range air-to-air missiles from a distance of over 100 kilometers, firing at digital blips long before the enemy pilots even know they're being hunted. However, the aggressor has turned the sky into a no-go zone. From deep within the interior, the S-400 systems launch interceptors that accelerate to Mach 6. Guided by powerful multi-static radars designed to find even the smallest stealth signatures. The sky is crisscrossed by the white contrails of missiles and the sudden, violent blooms of orange fire as multi-million-dollar aircraft are vaporized in midair. Once the air defense bubbles are breached, the true slaughter begins. NATO's Eurofighter Typhoons and French Rafales, now acting with relative impunity, descend to lower altitudes to hunt the steel flood below. They utilize SDB, small-diameter bombs, to strike moving armored columns with surgical precision. The visual from the cockpit is a nightmare of fire. The main highways, once the lifeblood of the advance, are transformed into highway of death scenarios. Thousands of logistical vehicles, fuel tankers, bridge layers, and mobile workshops are caught in a bottleneck of their own making. Without air cover, the aggressor's advance becomes a stationary target. A single pass by a pair of attack aircraft leaves a trail of burning wreckage that stretches for miles. The black smoke rising so high it can be seen from space. But the cost is astronomical. Both sides are losing airframes at a rate never seen in the history of aviation. The air is no longer a place for humans, it is a graveyard of titanium and electronics. For the soldiers on the ground, the sound of a jet engine is no longer a sign of hope, it is a signal to dive for cover. For in this war, if you can be seen, you can be killed. As the sun reaches its zenith, the sky is no longer blue. It is a hazy gray, choked with the remnants of spent fuel and the dust of 1,000 aerial explosions. The battle for air supremacy is not won, but it has reached a state of mutual exhaustion, leaving the cities below to face the coming storm alone. The momentum of the steel flood finally hits a wall of concrete and glass. As the armored columns reach the outskirts of the capital, the war changes its face. The open fields of the Suwalki Gap are replaced by a suffocating labyrinth of high-rise apartments, narrow alleys, and subterranean tunnels. This is the urban meat grinder, where the technological superiority of a 60-ton tank is neutralized by a single soldier with a shoulder-fired missile hiding in a basement. The sky over the capital is no longer gray, it is black. Thick, oily smoke from the burning fuel depots at the international airport rises thousands of feet into the air, creating a permanent twilight. The soundscape is a relentless cacophony of echoing gunfire, the rhythmic thud of heavy mortars, and the terrifying scream of low-flying drones. The assault on the city begins with a surgical strike by Spetsnaz units and airborne VDV forces, dropped via low-altitude helicopter insertions under the cover of the electronic fog. Their targets are the symbols of national identity, the Ministry of Defense, the Presidential Palace, and the Central Telecommunications Hub. Inside these marble halls, the war is fought room by room, floor by floor. The once polished floors are covered in a layer of shattered glass, spent brass casings, and the dust of pulverized drywall. On the main boulevards, the aggressor's tanks find themselves trapped. The charred husks of lead vehicles block the path, turning the wide avenues into killing zones. From the windows of the 10th floor balconies, NATO-supplied anti-tank guided missiles, javelins and NLAWs, streak downward, striking the thin top armor of the invading T-90 MiZ. The resulting explosions are spectacular and horrific, as the tank's internal ammunition carousels detonate, launching multi-ton turrets high into the air. But for every tank destroyed, a city block is leveled. Heavy thermobaric rocket systems, like the TOS-1A, are brought forward to clear the resistance. These weapons do not just explode, they create a pressure wave that collapses lungs and ignites the very air. turning entire apartment complexes into hollowed-out tombs. The smell is no longer just cordite and diesel, it is the sweet, sickly scent of death and the acrid tang of melting plastic. By the 48th hour, the organized defense begins to fracture. The command and control centers have been overrun, and the government is forced to evacuate under the cover of darkness. Retreating toward the western borders, the iconic national flag, which had flown defiantly over the central square, is finally lowered by a foreign soldier, replaced by the banner of the victor. The fall of the capital is not just a tactical loss, it is a psychological decapitation. The images of foreign tanks parked in front of the parliament building are broadcast across the globe, sending a shockwave of despair through the remaining free nations of Europe. The silence that follows the final surrender of the city center is more terrifying than the bombardment. It is the silence of a conquered people, a silence that signals the end of an era. Yet, even as the smoke settles, the eyes of the survivors are not filled with defeat, but with a cold, flickering light of hatred. The city has fallen, but the war has only just begun to change its shape. The grand theaters of mechanized warfare have fallen silent, but the war itself is merely breathing, exhaling the cold soot of a lost capital. As the aggressor's victory parades march down the soot-stained boulevards of Warsaw, a different kind of movement begins in the periphery. This is the strategic retreat, the long withdrawal toward the ancient, impenetrable shadows of the Carpathian Mountains and the deep, primeval forests of the west. Across the Vistula River, the remaining NATO engineers execute their final, heartbreaking orders, one after another. The massive steel and concrete spans, vital lifelines of the nation, are rigged with industrial-grade explosives. With a series of muffled roars that echo like thunder across the water, the bridges collapse into the current, severing the path of the advancing armor. It is a tactical necessity, but a symbolic wound, a physical admission that the heart of the country has been cut off from its limbs. In the mountain passes, the remnants of the regular army shed their heavy equipment for the tools of the insurgent. Here, the electronic fog of the enemy matters less than the local knowledge of a hunter. In these cold heights, we find a young soldier, his face etched with the grime of 10 days of constant retreat. His eyes reflecting the cold, sharp light of a survivor. He is not a general, he is the new face of the conflict. He represents the shift from tactical maneuvers to a war of dignity and attrition. The message sent back to the occupier is no longer through diplomatic cables, but through the sudden, sharp crack of a sniper's rifle and the nocturnal sabotage of fuel lines. The invader now finds that occupying a territory is far more lethal than conquering it. Every shadow in an alleyway, every rustle in the forest, and every silent villager becomes a potential threat. They have won the cities, but they have lost the soil. As the first winter snow begins to fall, covering the blackened skeletons of tanks and the mass graves of the fallen, a secret broadcast flickers to life from a hidden mobile transmitter. The voice is steady, weathered by the sound of gunfire, and it carries the weight of 1,000 years of history. It does not speak of surrender. It speaks of the Great Return. We did not leave our homes because we were defeated. The voice crackles through the static. We left so that we could become the storm that returns to reclaim them. Let the occupiers sleep with one eye open, for the trees have ears, the mountains have eyes, and the heart of this nation still beats beneath the ruins. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a cold wind howling through the twisted steel of a fallen bridge. The failure of the initial defense is not the end of the story, it is the prologue to a much longer, much more punishing chapter of human endurance. We go now, only so we may return tomorrow, clothed in thunder.